Somebody asked me, for low-level players, what is the best balance for your attributes? The answer is simple. If you're sitting on too little strength, you're going to die. If you're sitting on too much strength, you're farming inefficiently. So something I tell people in every coaching session on every hero, you need to think how survivable are you and how much damage can they do before you can react to it. And whatever that value is how much you should be sitting at. If that sounds too hard for you, don't play Morphling. I don't want people who are sitting on an extra 20 strength because they feel like they can't push buttons. This isn't the hero for you, if that is how you feel about Dota.
Banana slam jam.
Hello, this is BSJ, this is going to be my hero guide for Morphling. You guys voted for it at 40,000 YouTube subscribers, so hype on that. We'll do another one once again at 45,000 YouTube subscribers, so if you haven't already, make sure you do that. We're going to go ahead and talk about my idea of Morphling as a hero. I do believe Morphling is one of the highest conceptual caps of any hero in the game. On top of that, he can be very hard mechanically. The mechanical portion of it has a lot to do with the use of his attribute shift and the use of his morph, obviously, because effectively your morph gives you every other hero in the game regardless, or except for their ultimate. And not only that, but when I say the conceptual difficulty of his ultimate, there's a lot of weird interactions. Ones where, like, you maintain the ability when you morph back into Morphling. Some of them you lose when you go back into Morphling. And I'm not going to go into major depth about that kind of stuff. Some examples I'll give is that there used to be a bug that you could be metamorphed into Terrorblade, and if you used Metamorph, instantly turned back into Morphling, you would be a metamorphed Morphling. So you'd gain extra attack range and you'd gain extra damage. Those type of bugs have been randomly getting fixed all the time. So in order to avoid this video being too outdated too quickly, I don't want to talk about bug abuses. If you want to figure that stuff out for yourself, go ahead. But I'm going to talk about the ideal heroes to morph into. So as of now, when I play Morphling, I think of Morphling as a hero that is really hard to kill in the early to mid game. Late game, people tend to start having enough damage to deal with you. But in the early to mid game, I like to pick Morphling when they have a bunch of heroes like Earthshaker Clockwork offlane. That was an example of when I picked it recently. And it's like these two heroes rely completely on killing you once they get like level 5 or 6. Heed my warning call if you are a support or a Morphling, meaning that if you are a support that is supporting Morphling or you are a Morphling, your hero is a useless piece of shit at the rune. Any decent player will see a Morphling and go run at you and kill you, and you'll be like, BSJ, I hit for 64 damage, and I'll be like, you have 360 health, they're just going to kill you if you try to hit them back. What usually happens when I am Morph and I have a support that is dumb, they will walk into the rune and then they'll be like, wait, I don't have a carry to help me, and then they die. Or if I see a Morphling that thinks, oh, I'm strong enough to contest the rune, I'm going to walk up, and then they die, right? Morphling is one of the #1 carries in the game for the support or the carry to just die randomly at the rune at the start. So please, PSA, don't do that. For the most part on Morphling, I am sitting back underneath my tier 1 until the lane meets. That is what I'm doing most of the time. And Morphling in the safe lane especially applies to the mid lane as well. You just can't mess with this guy. Like, you can mess with him, right? You can make him strength morph and you can maybe slow down his farm. But there's no such thing as killing this guy with these like mid-game stunning heroes, unless Morphling is just way out of position or really bad with his reaction times. So these are the ideal games where I like to pick Morphling. I think to myself, the opponent really just can't mess with my hero, and they want to. Like, whatever heroes they've picked, like, man, they're looking to run at me constantly and kill me. Like, they're looking to kill me, and they can't. On top of that, I like to look for a hero on the enemy team that I like to morph into. I'd say the most notable ones are any with mobility, so Morana, Anti-Mage, Queen of Pain, or Ember Spirit. Ember Spirit's probably the #1, I'd say, if I had to give my #1. Simply because you're basically Ember Spirit without remnants. You have the Searing chain, the Sleight of Fist chains, and then you're a Morphling, right? You Sleight of Fist change, you Flame Guard, and then the Flame Guard lingers when you turn back into Morphling, and now you are a Morphling that has long range lockdown and all the things that Morphling also offers. These heroes that you just use their abilities and can quickly turn back into your hero are really nice. Other lingering buffs, for example, are like TA Refraction, Clockwork, Battery Assault, Enchant Totem from Earthshaker, and that's why the Ags with the Earthshaker combo was so broken for a while. Obviously, they've reworked Morphling a lot since then. He used to have the two health pools and mana pools with his ultimate, but now obviously that's not the case. It is important to note that you do get mana cost reduction when you're in your ult form, so that applies to items as well. And so I've always enjoyed turning into like PLs and using my Manta, super cheap mana cost, and you get all the benefits of their illusions. An example of this would be that PL's illusions get his ult, but you don't. So what I mean by that is if I morph into PL and I doppelganger or I Manta, all of my illusions will benefit from the ult, but I personally do not duplicate. So that's like another weird interaction of Morphling that comes to mind immediately. But the reason why I'm giving these examples is to prove to you that there's really, I could spend hours talking to you about specific unique interactions of Morphling's ult. But the idea is you get to play these other heroes. And I think the biggest thing I've noticed about Morph immediately as an ability is that sometimes you just use it and you die because you get all the stats of the opponent hero. And there's like an awkward cast animation to it. And if you like waveform in, morph into somebody, sometimes you just die instantly. So I think the number one warning I have about this ability is using it and then just dying instantly. That's really my main concern. So heroes that make that more straightforward, like the Embers, for instance, you morph from long range, you slide a fish chains, then turn back into yourself. That's just like one less thing to worry about, because on Morphling you do have a lot to worry about. So with that being in mind, those are like the complicated parts of Morphling, which pretty much is everything. But we're now going to build from the ground up, going from the early game. So in the side lane, what I've seen for starting items and what I've liked to build is 2 sets of Tangos or Tango Salve. Tango Salve pretty much means I'm scared of them going on me level 1, and that's really the only time I'm vulnerable, because once you get level 3, your attribute shift goes from 1 to 4. So level 1 is when you're really vulnerable if you get bursted down to low health. So if I think I'm scared of getting bursted, I buy the Salve. If not, I go 2 sets of Tangos, and then I get Circlet, 3 branches, and a Fairy Fire. Fairy Fire, super high value on Morphling because he's usually sitting at like 400 health. And then all of these all-stat items are super impactful on Morphling because every bit of strength you give yourself effectively can be used to turn into Agi, right? He also has low int gain, but it's mainly for the fact that every item that gives you strength and Agi is like twice as impactful. So first and foremost, you can't morph your bonus stats. So if I have 22 strength and then 50 strength from items, the 50 strength actually can't be morphed. So when I say it effectively gives you that ability, it means that like maybe you weren't comfortable before you had that item to shift all of your strength into Agi, but now you are. So effectively it would turn that 2 strength into 2 Agi. So maybe a Circlet is actually 4 Agi instead of a Slipper, which is only 3. That's what I mean by that example. But yeah, so those are my starting items. I can't think of a situation where I would not level my morph, my attribute shift. I think it's just too good. It gives you all stats, like between the two. It gives you damage. You can then shift down. So like, look at this. Level 1, I have 37 damage, right? If I full morph to Agi plus level this skill, I go from 37 base damage to 62. I can just do the quick maths there. That's without items. So if you don't level this ability, you're sitting at 37 base damage plus items. If you do level it, potentially 62, which obviously you turn from a techies into like a Riki in terms of how much base damage you have as a carry or as a mid laner. 61. But after that, you have a pretty huge decision in terms of waveform or adaptive strike. Waveform is the ideal scenario. Adaptive strike is if you feel like you absolutely need it to secure range creeps. This applies more in the mid lane, but at any point, I've seen the most points put into adaptive strike is 1. So at level 9, you're either 414 or 404. Plus, at that point, you can either level your ult or level your adaptive strike. It's just a value point meant to secure CS in lane, but they've nerfed waveform at lower levels a lot. So it used to be 11-second cooldown at all levels. So it was a nice value 1 point. And it used to always also be 100 damage instead of 75. But now it just scales too well, and the mana cost is about the same, and it's your only real mobility tool, right? So in the early game, it's really nice against heroes that I mentioned, like the Clockworks, like the Shakers, anyone who tries to commit onto you and allow you to escape. But it also allows you to close the gap to hit people. If you look at Morphling stat gain, right, he has 4.3 agi gain and 3 strength gain. So not even counting his attribute shift levels, where he gets an extra 2 agi every other level, you effectively have 7.3 agi gain if you are sitting on full agi the entire game. So in the laning stage, what that means for you is you start hitting hard real quick. So level 3, 5-ish, you start hitting around 90 damage. You know, you start hitting for 100 damage with virtually just like 2 Wraith Bands, and that's it. So it's really important to think about the fact that that's his main strength. He has really low base attack time, so it's really good for his attacks, or excuse me, for getting a lot of denies as well as last hits. You can utilize the 2 quick attacks that I talked about in the Jug Guide in order to abuse people when they're too far away from the creeps. So like if a hero's positioned away from this creep, I can look to double attack the creep when it's not quite low enough health to deny, so that I can then deny it. So like I said, unless I have to level Adaptive Strike for range creeps, I will level Waveform. When it comes to leveling your ultimate, it really boils down to how impactful it is early. I would say the majority of games that I watch people, they just don't level their ultimate until like 9. Sometimes I've seen it on Cancel, for instance. I saw him level it 11, 12. Like he didn't level his ult until 11. And then actually one game, he didn't level it until 14. He went all maxed other abilities, and then he took his level 10 talent, and then he leveled his ult. So it really does vary based on how impactful you think your ultimate is. It is definitely not an automatic, I am level 6, click my ultimate. Sometimes it has to do with who I'm laning against. Like if I'm against like a Sand King or something, that's a great hero to level my ultimate, because I can use it, Burrow Strike him, and then maybe kill him, or Sandstorm, 2 very good laning abilities. But a lot of time in the lane, you serve as a guy that can't be fucked with, and if they walk up to you, you hit them. Otherwise, you're not really doing much. That's kind of what your hero does. So I love playing him against offlaners that either rely on killing and can't kill you, or heroes like Darkseer that rely on like poking you down and harassing over the course of time. Like they just can't do anything to Morphling. Because these heroes that have their power spikes at like level 5, it's already too late for them. Morphling's power spike is level 3 and level 5. So at level 3, you can start abusing Attribute Shift. So what I mean by abusing Attribute Shift, a lot of you may already know this. Let's go ahead and get to level 3. So you can't really do this level 1, right? So level 3, usually you're pretty low on regen. So let's say I had to morph strength over the course of time, and I'm sitting at, an extra 30 strength. I've been taking damage, I've been trying to get last hits in the meantime. With 2 Wraith Bands, I hit for about 60. And I notice that whatever the difference is between my max health and this, so right now it's 780, if this equates to less than the amount of health I get from strength, which is an extra 29 strength, which is 580, that if I morph all the way down to 1 strength and then morph back up, I will effectively gain 200 health. So what I mean by this is right now I'm at 121 health. I'm missing 780. That's really the main thing, right? I'm missing 780. So we're going to factor in like a innate regen here. But I'll morph all the way down. I was missing 780, so we'll say 740 based on how long this is taking. And then now, I actually said it wrongly here. You're missing 780 health. We actually have to talk about how little health you go down to. That's the max you can actually miss. I actually said that wrong because this early. I always thought about it this way. But notice how, because I'm so low now, that the most I can actually be missing is 320 health. So if I'm missing anything more than 320, I can just go all the way down to 1 agi, or 1 strength, excuse me, and then morph back to strength to gain health. You see this a lot in the laning phase. So it's a way to abuse regen. One thing that I had an issue with as Morphling is that I had this syndrome as a carry that I felt the need to be full health all the time. On a lot of carries, that's kind of the case. You want to be tangoed up. You want to be as healthy as possible. But on Morphling, it's just not, because he doesn't have to spend gold on items that other heroes do have to spend gold on. So if you watch really high-level Morphlings, they do this. And if you watch really high-level players against high-level Morphlings, they'll try to snipe the Morphling when they know they're doing this. It's really frustrating sometimes to play him against heroes like Clockwork, like Zeus, like Pangolier with his swashbuckle. It can be annoying, and you have to play around it. So when you're doing that, make sure you are thinking, what are the random ways they could snipe me if I'm at 1 health? I guarantee if you've watched Morphling on stream, you've seen Morphlings die at 1 health when they're trying to do this. Super important that you abuse it, but also super important that you are careful with it. If you're against heroes that can snipe you, highly consider raindrops. Because raindrops effectively serve as like multiple salves for you, right? Because you can morph down to 1 health, and if they try to snipe you with a 100 damage nuke like Flare from Clockwork, you can then not be worried about that anymore. So when it comes to playing against heroes like that, it really just comes down to either waiting for them to cast their spells or being very careful about when you do it, or only sitting above the threshold with which they do their damage. And at that point, you can't really make use of this abuse. And I strongly consider an earlier morbid in those type of games. So whether or not you're mid or safe lane, if you're mid, usually you go bottle. You usually need some sort of regen item on Morphling. If you're safe lane, you go morbid pretty much every game. The morbid's just 2 value. If you compare it to a ring of health, it just does way too much for you as a hero. You'll pretty much always be at full, and if they ever take you down to no health, you can heal up almost instantly just from hitting stuff. You have high armor, which makes you have high EHP, effective HP, which means you benefit that much more from a morbid. And the whole thing I'm talking about with abusing your morph, or your attribute shift, it gets even better once you get level 5, and it gets even better once you get level 7, right? Every level of attribute shift is insane in terms of effectiveness. From level 2 to 3 is 2.5 times as fast. From level 3 to 4 is 2.5 times as fast. So it's pretty insane if you really think about it. Attribute shift is considered a heal. So what that means is it is affected by Spirit Vessel and Scotty and any other reduction of heal. So Venomancer, or Venomancer's just regen. Yeah, so Spirit Vessel and AA ulti. These are why heroes like AA are super good against Morphling. So normally, once I get level 7, I can effectively heal 500 health per second with my attribute shift to strength. But with Spirit Vessel on you, 55%, now you're sitting at like 270. But you're still gaining that max health. So not only are you healing your base health, but you're also gaining max health. So against like AA, if I'm sitting at 300 health out of 500, if I suddenly use all my strength morph during the AA ulti, I'm actually killing myself because I'm gaining more max health while not actually gaining any minimal health. So I'm suddenly, instead of 300 out of 500, I'm sitting at 300 out of 1,000, and then I might kill myself. This also applies to tread switching. You can't gain health, obviously, from tread switching. That's just an example of, so like if I'm against AA and I spam tread switching, I will just lose health. Figure that out, or you can test that in a lobby if you don't believe me. So, you have to be very careful. This is the early game skill that comes with Morphling. You pretty much at all times, you want to be as much agi as possible, right? That makes you attack faster, makes you do more damage. But then you also have to make sure you're not killable as often as possible. I've noticed the hardest thing about Morphling is I'm on edge the entire game because people know they can snipe you. They know they're either killing you instantly or never killing you. That's kind of how Morphling works. They're either killing you in less than a second or they're not killing you at all. You can't use attribute shift during stuns anymore, so you have to be ready. But attribute shift, since it's free in mana and it's much faster than it used to be, that's why all this abuse is happening, right? Like that's why people have started playing Morphling like this. Morphling's all about the edge. Like when I talked about that one video I made with Weaver, Morphling's all about pushing yourself to the limits. It's like, I think if I have 500 health, I survive here. I think if I have 800 health, I survive here. I think if I have X amount of health, I survive here. I think I can't survive at all. Like there was one situation I played him yesterday where I thought if I get dueled, as long as I push my attribute shift, I'll live. And I got dueled, I pushed attribute shift, and I still died. So it's like, wow, they did enough damage to chew through not only my base health, but also 500 health per second. I was pretty surprised by that. These are things where I nonstop learn on Morphling what my limits are. And you pretty much have to train yourself in the back of your mind to always think team fights while you're farming. Who's missing, who kills me, how much damage do they do. This is actually the hardest part about Morphling, in my opinion. I think having to constantly gauge to yourself, it's actually really good practice. For myself included, I've noticed that I always have to know where the opponent is to some extent, and I always have to be thinking about this. Like, I always have to. And if I'm not thinking about it, those are the times I randomly feed. And if you can get this down on Morphling, there's really no other hard hero. Like, there's no harder hero in the game to master this, I think. So this is like the best part about playing Morphling. And even if you're in the lower brackets, if you're trying to like push yourself to the limits and trying to, really challenge yourself mechanically and conceptually, Morphling is the perfect hero to do so. I used to play him a lot. I had a lot of Morphling games way back before he had his new ult. I've just only played him about 25, 30 times on his new ult. And I've really just learned the backfiring of the ult, and I've learned how to maximize his ult. That's what I'm learning over time. But all this other stuff hasn't really changed that much. So I'm just really going into depth about this attribute shift because, man, it can save you or lose you games. Like, absolutely. And really emphasize maximizing the use of this in the early game. And pretty much, sometimes you'll have to ferry yourself regen later on in the laning stage, like 5 minutes plus. And a lot of times, how many Wraith Bands I buy, if I buy Treads beforehand, if I buy Wand, however many items I buy before Morbid Mask, that's pretty much determined by how much regen I think I'm going to have to buy. Because if I can buy an earlier Morbid Mask and save myself 400 gold on regen, that's worth it. But at the same time, by buying that Morbid, I'm sacrificing 900 gold worth of damage items, right? Like Glove of Haste and a Wraith Band. That's like a Glove of Haste and a Wraith Band worth of damage. So, and farming rate. Because Morphling in the early game has serious mana problems. So his real only way to farm is to constantly right-click. Just constantly. And that's really what Morphling comes down to. In some of my coaching sessions, I've talked about the necessity to always be hitting creeps as often as possible as a carry. That's where efficiency comes in. No hero that's more important than Morphling, because you can't really afford to spam waveform to farm. Very few games do you actually rush Lincolns like you used to. So since you're not, your main issue is mana. Really solved by clarities. My favorite jungle items on Morphling are the mana items, whether it's Fated Brooch, which isn't perfect, but it's nice because he's really slow. As you see, 280 base movement speed. Arcane Ring's the dream, in my opinion. Other ones are Iron Talon, lets you just farm the shit out of Ancients. I don't really care about stat items that much on Morph. Like, yeah, they're nice, but I'd prefer all the other ones I already mentioned. Royal Jelly, obviously, really good on Morphling as well. When it comes to your item builds later on in the game, there's kind of two ways to play Morphling. There's like this hard right-click build Morphling, and then there's the E-Blade burst damage Morphling. And I pretty much have to ask myself how I think team fights are going to play out. If I have the ability to stand my ground and hit people, I want to go for that build. If there's supports in the back that prevent me from being able to do that, then obviously I go E-Blade, right? I have to burst those supports down so that I can play Dota. Sometimes as Morph, the hardest skill is to recognize when you're allowed to go in or not. Morphling's edge of death and life is so thin, right? That line is so thin. It's like you can either go in and be a raid boss, or you go in and you instantly kaplute. You know, you just die instantly. And a lot of his build says what you think you can do in that game. The late game dream is like Satanic, Scotty, Butterfly, you know, these type of items are the dream. But if you're against these like AA type heroes, obviously Satanic is out of the question. It really does just boil down to how I think I'm going to play the fights. Like the other day, I knew that if I played Morphling regularly, it was going to be a hard game. So they had a PL, and I'm like, I'm going to be morphed into PL pretty much this entire game. So I went Manta Diffusal on Morphling. Manta's kind of like the luxury farm item when you're going right-click. Again, it removes Spirit Vessel, silences. All of these things are very annoying for Morphling. And then if you're worried about stuns, but other games, I'll just go straight for that S and Y. Like if I look at my builds real quick. So like in this game, they had a lot of stuns and a lot of bursts, right? So I just went Satanic, I went S and Y first item. So I went Morbid, S and Y, into Scotty, and then I was like, okay, I need a BKB to fight, and at this point, their BKBs are getting lower. I'm going to look to burst people with all this agility. So it's like, I identified to myself how I thought this game was going to go, and it's like, if I just buy straight E-Blade here, I'm going to then have to buy BKB, and they have a lot of magic burst damage, so that doesn't really feel good. So I'm like, I want this initial tank item, another tank item, then BKB to fight them, and then E-Blade, right? And Morphling games, this is usually what wins look like, somewhere around here. If you die like 3 or 4 times on Morphling, I will not say you will reliably win the game. Other games of Morphling look really rough, you know? My recent loss right here. These are the only 5 Morphling games on my main account, just to show you, 3 wins and 2 losses. I was getting ran at all game. This is one of the worst ways that Morphling can lose, is the opponent is just messing with you. Early game, I really didn't have very many deaths, right? I died once in the laning phase and then didn't die for another 15 minutes. But they were running at me constantly, and I was constantly scared, constantly sitting at like 1800 health and constantly worried about getting ganked, and I couldn't farm where I wanted to farm. The dream Morphling games are where you just run around at like 700 health, killing creeps and killing buildings. Those are the dream Morphling games, and you need to try to envision that when you're seeing the draft. When I picked at this game, I thought I was going to have more space. Sadly, my mid lane lost pretty badly, and I was just getting ran at for the rest of the game. And I think it's proof that Gunner, being such a high-tier Morphling player, I think he's like level 20 on Dota Plus, he knew that his job as a mid laner against my hero was to just run at me constantly. He wasn't even killing me, like I said. Like for this first, I guarantee you, if you watch this replay, he ran at me from the 8-minute mark till here. I didn't die a single time, but my net worth was crippled. Those are the type of games where Morphling is really rough. Another game that looks really rough for Morphlings is when there's a hero on the opponent team that you just can't kill. I think the #1 hard counter to Morphling is PL. At no point in the game do you deal with PL. I've seen professional matches where the Morphling's literally 20-0 against a PL, and they barely win or sometimes lose. Because PL doesn't really kill you that well, but you just never kill PL. There's no amount of items you can buy that kills PL. Mjolnir's bullshit. Can't kill him. Like, it doesn't work. Radiance, not an item, right? You just can't build items that kill PL. And it looks like I have Pango Lesh, so maybe we could deal with PL. But obviously these two guys had a very, very rough game. So this was a game where there's just games like this, where Morphling's issue is usually not dying too many times. It's usually that he can't do enough damage in fights to win, or he can't get enough space to farm because the opponent's just constantly messing with him. These are the definition of hard-looking games. Obviously, I didn't pick Morphling into PL. I would never pick Morphling intentionally into PL. This game, I saw these 3 heroes. I saw the 2 supports and an offlaner, and I'm like, none of these heroes fuck with me, so I picked Morphling. Sadly, this guy picked at the same time I did, but this is just proof of what a hard Morphling game looks like. Even when you're ahead. Morphling is one of the best heroes in the game to go 15-0, die once, and lose. 100%. One of the best heroes in the game to do it. If you want to learn how to lose a game in 1 death after being 15-0, play Morphling. BSJ, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. Well, the answer is that this hero is incredibly rewarding. I've thoroughly enjoyed playing him in games where you make sick plays, turning into Invoker and Tornado EMPing him and then killing him. It's just an awesome experience. This game is on YouTube. Like, I do have it being uploaded to YouTube, so if you haven't checked it out already, you should. I think this was my best Morphling performance, but at the same time, it's still a loss. There's some people like this Pugna that you just can't carry against heroes like PL. But that's the beauty of Morphling, is you never stop learning his limits. Even though I thought I played really well this game, I could point out to you 10 times that I could have used abilities better, or that I could have maybe been a bit more survivable in fights and maybe prevented one of these deaths, right? That's the beauty of Morphling. That's what I love playing Morphling for. When I think about my items, when I think about my use of my ultimate, every game I identify what hero I'm going to be playing against, or like playing as. If it's an ally, like an Earthshaker, or maybe a Sand King with a sick Ags that's not tied to their ultimate, I'll strongly consider an Ags. That influences my items a lot. But when it goes into team fights, I have to be preemptively thinking who I'm going to go on, who I'm going to cast my ultimate on if I see them, and what I'm going to use that ultimate for. Is it mobility? Is it to burst somebody? Is it to turn a spell on and then quickly turn back? Example being like Refraction on TA. What is my ultimate being used for? And that applies a lot to how you play fights. One of the most annoying items for Morphling to deal with, obviously Spirit Vessel, but in the late game, MKB. Any hero that right-clicks really fast with an MKB, man, like those are the heroes that are so hard to play against if you're Morphling. In this Lena game, I died once in the mid game. This is my 1 death, was CC&C, just went like 3rd item MKB. And he just shredded me. Like, MKB's magic damage, 75 magic damage per hit, and he in 1 stun he hit me 10 times and I died when I was at 1,000 health, because it's like Morphling's a hero with 1,000 health and 50 armor. So this is a great example of people itemizing against Morphling. You wanted to make it so by the time he's done getting stunned, he's either dead, he's out of mana, or the rest of his team is dead. So really the idea for me as Morphling is the way to create a hard game for him is to make it so he can't kill you fast enough, or that he is so scared of dying instantly to you that he can't roam free in the middle of a fight. So that has to do with your items. That has to do with the way you play against Morphling. Like as a Morphling player, you want to create that scenario. Like, I want to be able to go into the fight and cast spells without worrying about them defensively. Sometimes BKB is the best offensive item or like aggressive item you can buy on Morphling. Because in certain games, if they don't have MKB builders, if you're at 1,000 health with a BKB, you hit for 300 damage and they can't kill you. Like, they just can't kill you if you're BKB'd. So those are the type of games where it's like, whatever items I'm building, I just want to be able to go into the fight, not be afraid of instant death, and I want to be able to cast my spells offensively and not have to worry as much about getting screwed over defensively. In terms of hotkeys, I used to play Morphling before he had the 2 separate adaptive strikes. So I used to use E and D for this, so that's what I changed my hotkeys to. Like on default, it's Q, W, E, DFR. So I changed these back to ER, and then I changed Adaptive Strike Agility to W, and Adaptive Strike Strength to Alt W. So that's how I use my hotkeys on this hero. I use Quick Cast on every spell. Make sure, whenever you're morphed into heroes, that the hotkeys they have are working. There are random bugs that make hotkeys on heroes not work. So Morphling uses the hotkeys of the hero he is morphed into. So, like, if I have a Faceless Void on the other team, I want to make sure I check, I want to check options, hotkeys, and go into Faceless Void and see to make sure all of his stuff is hotkeyed, right? That's what I want to make sure it is. I want to make sure it's on the right quick cast or cast. Because you will use the hotkeys that you have for the opponent hero or ally hero that you are turning into. So making sure you check those before the game on any hero you plan to turn into. Some of the worst games I've played as Morphling are games where I didn't think ahead of time who I was going to turn into, and then during fights I'm like figuring out, I'm like, oh wow, that'd be a great hero to turn into. And so instead of like casting my spells perfectly, I'm busy, thinking about who I'm going to morph into. And that's something where as Morphling you can't afford to worry about random bullshit. You have to focus purely on what your hero is supposed to do and what spells and what order you're supposed to cast them, because you have a lot of spells. This one stuns, this one doesn't. This is your one mobility as Morphling. If you push this and then get stunned, you're going to die, right? Because it's going to morph you into no health. So like if you're sitting at 2,000 health and you push E and then you get stunned, you're going to die. The same thing I said about the laning stage, though, can be applied with your attribute shift in the mid to late game. Sometimes Morphling's job is one of two things. I would say Morphling has two jobs. One, to run into the fight and just be absolutely rampant and kill everybody. That's one job. The other job is to tank all the initiation, barely survive, disengage the fight, morph all the way down to 1 health, and then morph back up and rejoin the fight. Like I said with Abuse, you can do that. It takes like 8 seconds or so. So you just like get out of the fight, go all the way down to 1 strength, go all the way back up to like a functional amount of health, and rejoin the fight. So as Morphling, I try to ask myself which one of those fits the description of this game. Usually ideal Morphling games, you're playing the first one. And in Morphling games where your team has enough damage but no one to really go in first, that you're in the second one, right? Where if you have no one to go in before you, you kind of have to build to go in first. And so Morphling can kind of either be a super frontline tank, like a guy that starts the fight just by going in, or a guy that sits in the back waiting for that opportune moment to just shit on somebody and get the right spells off and just screw them. Since Morphling has really weird cast animations on stuff like Waveform, on all of his morph and all that kind of stuff, his adaptive strikes, and if you accidentally push E or you accidentally push D and suddenly you're morphing strength and now you're at 3,000 health and do no damage, or now you're at 500 health and you're dead instantly. These are all things where if you're not on the case about it in your head, you're just going to mess up once and you're going to fat finger and you're going to die. So really having that foresight on Morphling is super important. So right now, I'll just say this segment of the guide to end it is going to be Twitch chat questions that they feel like I didn't answer. So first and foremost, I got asked about Morphling's farming patterns. Morphling has 2 ways of playing. One, if you're in that game where you're like the unkillable guy, and you're usually going to go in first or whatever, you want to just play the dead lane and make it so you're this like unobstructable or like unbreakdownable wall that they can't get through. And a lot of that has to do with if they go on you and you waveform away, can you live? And if the answer is yes, you play like that. If the answer is no, then you play like a normal carry or like an average carry, and you play the top triangle and the opponent's dead lane. I'd say the thing about Morphling is he is a huge threat of constant pressure when it comes to farming. You kill buildings really fast. You effectively have 7.3 agi gain, and you have 1.5 base attack time. So compared to a lot of other carries, you shred buildings. But at the same time, you have, with boots, 325 movement speed. So if you're finding yourself, farming in your own jungle, and then the opponent 5-man's top, and you want to kill the bottom tower, it's going to take you, a minute and a half to get there. Obviously, I exaggerated, but the point is that being as close to towers as possible with your farming patterns is really important on Morph. Really important, more so on him than almost any other carry I've played, because his movement speed is so slow, but yet he kills buildings so fast. So whenever I'm farming, I think I either stay in my own safe lane, looking to push it out, farm jungle, and if they show elsewhere, I kill their tower. Otherwise, I do the same thing in the top half of the map. In a really rough Morphling game, where I ask myself, hey, I want to do that, what I just said, but I can't, then you end up usually farming Ancients. With Iron Talon especially, if you get Iron Talon, that's the dream. If you're on Dire, you farm the Triangle. If you're on Radiant, hopefully you can still farm Ancients. But sometimes you're just delegated to your Triangle, and you're hitting neutrals with that Morbid Mask. The definition of like a rough Morphling game in the early game is one where you can't really show on any lanes because they kill you instantly with like, instant stun supports or an AA, and you just have to sit in your jungle off map. And really all it boils down to is the same skill is applied on every other hero, is what kills me, how far up can I play, and my farming patterns really revolve around constantly threatening towers. Not necessarily hitting them, but threatening to hit them such that if the opponent groups up, you can kill the tower. Especially if you are a mid lane morph, because as mid lane morph, you don't really want to rotate unless you have an opportune rune, like a haste rune or something. So the goal is as morph, if the opponent mid is rotating, you usually punish that by killing his tower. Don't be afraid once you have a Morbid Mass to like tank tower and tank damage when you're farming. Like go ahead, tank damage, you'll get it right back with the jungle creeps and lane creeps that you're hitting. So really pushing his health pool to the limits in that regard, and like the 8 to 12 minute mark is super important for his like snowball momentum of the game. Somebody asked me, for low level players, what is the best balance for your attributes? The answer is simple. If you're sitting on too little strength, you're gonna die. If you're sitting on too much strength, you're farming inefficiently. So something I tell people in every coaching session on every hero, you need to think how survivable are you and how much damage can they do before you can react to it. And whatever that value is how much you should be sitting at. If that sounds too hard for you, don't play Morphling. I don't want people who are sitting on an extra 20 strength because they feel like they can't push buttons. This isn't the hero for you, if that is how you feel about Dota. I want you to think, I can survive at 800 health or more, 600 health or more, 2,000 health or more. Whatever that exact value is at any given moment in the game, you have to ask yourself that. And you will be wrong plenty, but I think Morphling is great for learning because of that. The point is, if you're not willing to play like that, I assure you, you are completely wasting your time playing Morph. Somebody specifically asked about Morph versus Bristleback. Morph just fucks Bristleback. You just need to not be stupid and eat a bunch of quills before you're like Morbid Mask level 5. Both heroes are super weak level 1. The difference is you hit for 63, he hits for 49. So you just get CS. And then once you get level 5 in a Morbid, he can't touch you. What are scary lanes, dual lanes versus Morph? Scary dual lanes versus Morph. The definition would be I'm walk up and I can't push my attribute shift before I die. And they can punish me really hard level 1. How do you fight against PL who goes Diff Blade? I already said PL's like hardest counter to Morphling in the game. Morphling is similar to Drow in the laning stage. He wants a support that stands in front of him, because in the early levels, he is super fragile to that. It doesn't mean as a Morphling you can't pick heroes that don't do that, but if I had to pick Morphling, it'd be like a Drow Luna type support, where when I say that, I mean the same types of supports that fit those heroes. I want an Ogre, I want an Undying, I want a Bane. Any hero that can be in front of me in the laning stage. The cool thing about Morphling compared to these other ranged squishy heroes, though, is once he gets level 3, maybe level 5, he no longer functions like that. He is super strong, super tanky, super independent. So usually as a support, your job is to secure your Morphling's level 3. So give him as much solo XP as possible if you can. Obviously don't leave him alone if you need your help. But give him as much solo XP as possible, because the minute he gets level 3, at least level 5, like at the latest level 5, he is almost always independent of you if he picked it in a decent Morphling game. Somebody said in one of my games I got ran at constantly, they are clearly watching the game that I was talking about from yesterday. The answer to that is you can't really do anything as Morph in that case. What I've noticed is the ideal scenario is I just don't die to that kind of crap, and eventually my team will make enough space on the map so that the opponent can't afford to screw with me anymore. And obviously those are the rough Morphling games. Those games are usually when the opponent mid kind of stomp your mid, or it's like not the perfect Morphling game. Those are types of games where I try to ask myself why that happened, because those are not good Morphling games. So whether it was in the draft or your mid lane lost really bad. If it's your mid lane losing really bad, there's not too much you can learn from that in terms of drafting, but it's important to recognize why it happened. If it's in the draft, like the heroes on the other team just did that and your heroes didn't do a good job of making space for you, like if you look at your heroes, they're not space-making heroes, I don't want Morphling on my team. Like, that's not a good Morphling game. I either need to be the guy that's super powerful, making space. In that case, you're usually the mid laner. Against like good matchups like Meepo. Really good matchup against Meepo. Or you're the safe lane carry that has a good mid lane matchup, like meaning your mid laner has a good matchup and he'll make the space for you. Because Morphling, he kind of makes space for himself in the sense that he doesn't need help to not die, but he does need other heroes to go do things such that what he's accomplishing is not just, simply making him live and slow down his farm at the same time. How do you play versus Slark as carry Morph? Against Slark, I almost always want to go E-Blade. Almost always. You can E-Blade yourself to Ghost Scepter defensively, Your Ghost Scepter will usually come online before the Slark Diffusal Blade or any other items that allow him to go on you. And then if he ever gets stunned at all, you just kill him instantly, right? So in terms of other items to go with that, kind of depends on the other heroes in the game, but I'll pretty much always go Shotgun Morphling against a Slark. But also not a great matchup. When do you think people can start to learn Morph? I talked about what skills it takes to play Morph. I think you can start learning him at any point in your career. Just note that he is very hard, and you will be incredibly frustrated, especially in the early times of learning him. So if you're willing to go through that, I think it's worth it. But to be honest, if you don't play enough Dota, he's not the hero that you'll learn just playing casually sometimes. Morphling is super weak level 1, super powerful level 3 and 5. So you want heroes that stomp him level 1, but then also get much stronger level 3 and 5. Like, I've seen Timbersaws win against Morphling. I've seen Monkey Kings crush Morphling. Like, notice all these heroes. Usually their weak point is level 1, and they usually come online really hard at level 3 and 5. So there have to be heroes that are relatively stronger than Morphling at level 1, but usually suffer level 1, and then proceed to shit on him level 3, 5. The difference between those matchups and like a Bristleback is even though Bristleback fits that description of being weak level 1 but really strong level 3 and 5, his level 3 and 5 are not stronger than Morphlings, so he will lose matchups. These are examples where the punish Morphling, those are the type of heroes you want to pick. In terms of contesting Morphling late game, Ricky, super annoying to play against. Drow can be super annoying. Anti-Mage can be super annoying. Any hero that gets up in your face and hits you with an Abyssal and an MKB can be super annoying. It just kind of depends on how the game plays out in that case. Any heroes that have low HP, high armor, like Terrorblade, really hard to play against Morphling, because you just get E-bladed and die. You always have Attribute Shift maxed at 7, period. My last and final note is Morphling has low HP and high armor, so you deal with him with magic burst damage generally, or pure damage. That is the way to deal with Morphling, and in theory, you either stop his morph from being effective, like his Attribute Shift, or you deal the damage that doesn't give a shit about it, or you burn all of his mana, because without mana, Morphling is generally pretty useless. So natural diffusal builders, natural heroes with pure damage, such as OD, can be very hard to deal with as a Morphling. Hope you guys learned something. I'll let my YouTube editor know that the guide's up.